Hello and welcome to Eavesdropping at the Movies. I'm Mike.
And I'm Jose.
And we've just been to see The Irishman. Massive, epic gangster film that I had no idea was 3.5 hours long until you told me.
How did you miss that?
I didn't know
all over the news.
No, because, well, yeah, I watched the news. I didn't know anything about it. I knew it was Scorsese, I knew it was a big gangster thing, and I knew there was de-aging in it. And I knew, obviously, it was Netflix, and we just... I said, maybe there'll be this, maybe they'll show it in the cinema, because they did with Annihilation, which Netflix bought.
Yes.
What's his name film? And the Everyman was showing it, as they did with Annihilation, so we bought tickets immediately.
Yes.
And then just before going out today, you said it's 3.5 hours long. I said, what? Who needs it? But I am willing to, kind of eat my words and say that I think by the last half hour, the length is justified. Although
I was entertained throughout.
Oh, so was
actually.
I. Yeah.
I looked at my watch twice, but that was more to get a sense of where are we in this 3.5 hour journey, rather than that I was bored or it's a great. It's one of the sad ironies of life that it's a Netflix film, because I think it's almost like a film that's made for the cinema. Right, I just enjoyed the audience interaction so much. I love those old ladies at the beginning. What did they say next to?
Yeah, so it's in sofas in the Everyman, and I got seats right in the middle, and the sofa next to us was on my left was occupied by these two little old ladies who came in, and they were lovely, and they're in their 70s, and the one said to the other, if I fall asleep, wake me if I snore. And then at the end, because he went out to buy some stuff from Tesco, and I hung around and I was chatting to him at the end, and the one said that she had fallen asleep, but because she hadn't snored, she didn't wake her up. So.
Oh, because you see, I kind of kept my ears open, and the thing is, I thought they were responding to everything.
They were. They absolutely were, but one of them also, for a little bit, just had a nap.
Oh, right, okay.
But no, they loved it. And I think one of the things that is really brilliant about the film is how funny it is.
It's so funny.
It's like people maybe don't give Scorsese the credit for his comedy direction. I
thought just the narration of it was brilliant, right? It's almost like he uses every aspect. So, kind of there are flashbacks, and then there's almost like a contradiction of, what someone is saying, and then kind of you see somebody very lively, and then those things about, he was killed with 3 bullets in 1980 or whatever, right? In front of his house, right? And this one lived to old age. He died of prostate cancer or whatever. That was just brilliant, really. It's like you're getting kind of all of these perspectives in this really smooth narration, but that is also kind of so complex and interesting and witty. It's a film that is kind of about... It's a complex film, because on the one hand, it's about unions and gangsters and the similarity and the interconnection between, gangsters and unions and politicians, right? And how they're all kind of embroiled together. The Kennedys kind of, feature in the background of all of this, and on the other hand, it's kind of just funny, really.
It's about, when it comes to the ways in which these various people are categorised and organised, it's really about structures of power.
Yes.
And how people want to hold on to power and how people do hold on to power. And the thing that was most interesting to me about it, and I suppose we should say spoilers are going to come up, because and it's worth seeing it at the cinema.
Yeah.
Because we were saying just before we went out as well, if 3.5 hours is kind of daunting, but you would never watch it on Netflix. You'd never keep your attention on the film for that.
And also, just some things will not work. There's a whole tour de force performance by Al Pacino. I think this has to be one of his greatest performances, really. And really, I think, the performances are almost all tremendous in this film, but I think his rises above the rest.
Yeah, he steals every scene he's in, he stands above.
That's right. And, there's a whole relay of close-ups, medium close-ups, where he gets laughs, just by looking, by the way he looks, right, at the audience in the film, right? And so it's something that's almost not built into the narrative that he achieves, right? Just through kind of what he does, and it's just absolutely brilliant.
Acting is reacting,
and you know, I don't think, well, certainly I have a huge TV, and I just don't think I would get the nuance and the detail of his eyes and his to be able to kind of respond like that. And actually, I also don't think I would respond like that, looking at it on my own. Yeah, it's almost like you need an audience, you know, an interaction with an audience to respond to things as lively, as vividly as there was at the screening.
Yeah, and it was a very willing audience.
Yes.
Yeah, everyone was there for a reason, you know. They hadn't just gone to see this. Like, it's one of these where, because it's this Netflix thing, or they're only going to let it come out in cinemas for a little bit, you make the effort to see it, and because you've made the effort to be there, you are for it.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
But so what I was going to say, I think, was that one of the things that is most interesting to me about this, and why I picked up on the last half hour, and why I warned about spoilers as well, is that these gangsters get a lot older than they do in most gangster movies. Partly that's that gangsters tend to die, you know, before they get old. But the reason that I say, you know, it kind of pays off by then is because for most of the film, as much as I was enjoying it, I was kind of questioning, where's this going to lead to? It's clearly doing this take you through a life thing, and also clearly it's not going to end in Rob De Niro's death as a young man, because the framing device is him in an old people's home at the age of like 80.
So you know that he's the one who's going to survive.
Yeah, and it's his reflections on his past that the film is kind of taking you through, and I was really amazed at how the film transforms into this kind of really elegiac, melancholy, sort of slow thing at the end about the debts that we build up and have to pay. Like by the end, you're thinking, with Rob De Niro sat in his room, in his wheelchair with no one around, no one, you know, the priest's not even going to be there for Christmas. You think, what is a life? You know, what is this life that he's made himself? He's lost everyone, basically. Everyone, you know, all the gangsters and friends that he had, either they died, you know, in violence, or they've died just by getting old too, and he's just happens to be outliving them.
I know, though.
But his family's driven away.
I just suspect if you live long enough, that's what'll happen. People die.
Well, yeah.
You know, though, yeah.
But he also driven his family away, and that's really pinpointed in the end. Anna Paquin plays his eldest daughter, and the day that he kills Jimmy Hoffa, this is what the film tells us, no one actually knows how Jimmy Hoffa died, and so this is kind of based on real events, and it's also based on a book about those real events. So, you know, it's there's a kind of alternate or sort of supposed history, I suppose, going on in this. The day that he kills Jimmy Hoffa, though she doesn't know it exactly, is the last day that she speaks to him. It's kind of come too far.
Because she knows.
Yeah, she does.
So, and I think kind of, you know, there's a whole aspect of the film to discuss in relation to that. But first, I just want to talk about the aspect of age, because when I was hearing that there was all this de-aging technology, and that you see Al Pacino and Robert De Niro as young men, I was expecting to see them as young men. And actually, you really see them as middle-aged men.
They're at least in their 40s.
Yeah.
Probably De Niro you meet when he's in his 30s, but yeah.
Well, I mean, I think he's meant to be in his 30s, but really he looks middle-aged. And I did wonder through 2/3 of the film whether the film might not have had other dimensions and been livelier by casting young people. Right, so what I was thinking about in specific was in relation to The Godfather and Godfather 2, where in fact Robert De Niro played Marlon Brando, right? You know, and actually kind of made his career out of playing the same character that Marlon Brando did, as well. And you know, I did think, might it not have been better and more interesting to have cast younger people in the younger roles and do it in a traditional way, you know?
It's an interesting thought. I mean, it didn't really occur to me that it was a mistake to have done it this way, or that it might have been more interesting to do it with different actors. I suppose, you know, I think the de-aging, particularly of De Niro, because he is sort of, it's a little bit later when you meet Al Pacino. De Niro you do meet when he's like the youngest that you see. It is very smooth. You know, I mean, visually smooth. Like there is something fake about it, obviously, and it's noticeable. But before long, I was with it, and then I think it helps as well that fairly rapidly the film ages them up a bit as the story moves on.
Yes.
And the older that they get, obviously, the better and more convincing that they look.
Yes, but I do think the film loses something, because the thing about this de-aging technology is it's only working on faces.
Yes, this occurred to me.
And the thing about, if you just see De Niro in The Godfather, or actually just in his 70s films, in Raging Bull, you know, when he was young and handsome, you know, there was a kind of an animal quality, a drive, an energy, that he kind of deployed with his body, right? And actually, which was very sexy, you know, and kind of, you know, but in this film, it would have been just, you know, part of the drive, part of what explains why, you know, this guy who's a truck driver ends up becoming a gangster, right? You know, yeah. And actually, what you see even when he's walking is kind of like a middle-aged face on an elderly body.
Yeah, you can't de-age his gaits, and he moves like an old man. Particularly, I thought that the first moment I thought that was the scene where he beats up the kind of bakery bloke for messing with his daughter,
and like he kicking him like an old man.
He kicks him like an old man kicks someone. You can't. Yeah, exactly.
So I did wonder about that, actually. I think it's a mistake that the film would have gained something, you know, by casting younger people in the younger parts. I think from the point that Jimmy Hoffa comes in, that the aging technology would have been brilliant, right? Because,
and it was. I mean, it did work. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, but by the point that Jimmy Hoffa comes into the picture, it's actually 10 years after De Niro has met the Joe Pesci character and has, you know...
Yeah.
So... I think, so the first hour is without Pacino, you know, and when Pacino comes in, I mean, he really injects, like, kind of power.
A huge amount of life and unpredictability.
Oh, so brilliant. I mean, you know, I was just kind of gobsmacked with him, because in a way, you know, I haven't liked some of his later performances. You know, there is a sense in which there are times when he is too much, really. And sometimes... like in Scarface, he's too much and it's great, you know, and sometimes, like in that film he won the Oscar for, where he plays the blind guy, it's too much and it's not great, even.
No idea. Scent of a Woman?
Yeah.
Scent of a Woman. The thing about Pacino, I think, is that he always looks for the interest in a line. He tries to make it interesting, and when you have a bad director kind of shaping his performance, you end up with Shouty Al. That is the stereotype. But when you have a very good director and a very good script, which this is as well, it brings out everything that is interesting and lively about those lines, and also it fits the character here. I mean, it really fits the character. Like, the character is animated, slightly paranoid, very angry.
Yeah,
kind of, it fits Pacino very well.
He's brilliant. I mean, though, I must say, the other person I was very happy, you know, to see many people. Joe Pesci was tremendous as well.
I didn't even recognise him at first as the very, very, very old version.
Yeah.
I thought, because then you see him a little bit younger and you go, fucking hell, that's Joe Pesci, really? Yeah. Wow. And what a joy it was to see him.
It was a joy to see him. And he's so wily and wise and authoritative, you know, and knowing, and, you know, kind of, I mean, his part doesn't have as much humour as some of the others. Right, though there's always like kind of, you know, this wily intelligence at work in everything he does. It was like sheer joy to see him. I also love the way the whole thing was filmed. You know, kind of. I mean, I actually don't know how it was filmed.
It was on 35mm, if that's what you're asking.
Well, then it looks like it was.
Yeah.
You know, because I mean the faces are so well illuminated, right? Like kind of, you know, there's sometimes this close-ups where just the faces have, you know, kind of texture, particularly on the women, actually. I love the whole set design. I loved, you know, it really does evoke the 70s. I mean, you know, a large chunk of it is set in the late 40s and 50s, you know, and 60s. But then there's also from the mid-60s to the 70s, to the 80s, there is like this particular kind of look, with the women, they're wearing like kind of Pucci type tops, you know, very colorful and white, you know, when they're stopping on their cigarette breaks on these endless trips to extort money. You know, I thought that was all
it's wonderful. Early 70s, that, isn't it? Because that's when they go to kill Hoffa.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
and it does evoke that beautifully. I do want to take a moment just to disagree with you on the de-aging. That I think it would have been a loss had the film used different actors as the younger versions, because I think although there is something noticeably smooth about it, and you're right that the actors can't do everything physically, that they really could at that age. I still think I found it entirely convincing and a beautifully smooth transition, because you were talking about the smoothness of the narration of the film, and it's something that really occurs to me because I was thinking about The Wolf of Wall Street, because that's 3 hours, and I never batted an eyelid at that. So I thought, I'm being a bit unfair here saying 3.5 hours. Oh God, how dare you? I love The Wolf of Wall Street, and that's 3 hours long, and that's a film that really is unbelievably smooth, and it's like you can't think of how. What I try and think of, and what I tried to concentrate on here, was how Scorsese gets into and out of scenes and makes those transitions. And it's funny because I'd have to sit down and study it. Like, you can identify scenes, and there are some really cracking set pieces, but in terms of transitions, how things move along, it's elegant, so unnoticeably smooth how that happens. And I think that one of the reasons that works in this in particular is that he isn't changing actors.
Well, I don't know. I mean, again, my reference point here is The Godfather 2. And I think Scorsese could have done something, just with casting younger actors in the Joe Pesci and Robert De Niro parts.
Yeah. Do you not also think that you would be going, I'm waiting for the main story to start while I'm not looking at the stars here?
No more than you're waiting for Al Pacino to appear. I mean, right. And actually that could have given like some great chance to a young actor, actually. And really, I think the parts needed. So kind of just to be fair, all of those opening sequences with Robert De Niro meeting him at the petrol station, and then how he slowly becomes embroiled in a life of crime, and the killing of people and the kicking of people and so on. It requires a young man, right? And actually, I think a young man would have brought an energy and a drive and a sexiness and a way of moving. Yeah, that kind of the de-aging phase doesn't make up for it. And actually, I think it's kind of slightly offensive. So this is kind of a critique of Scorsese in a way, because it is. And, he is brilliant with actors. So it surprises me, that he's only paying lip service to what actors do. And actors, even in cinema, are much more than their faces. And that is really it's noticeable.
It occurred to me that the story would have probably been told in a different way had these not been 60, 70-year-old men. I don't know exactly how old they are, but they're old guys. Were they age appropriate actors, they would be more by way of action, because actually a lot of scenes involve just walking to a table, sitting down, having a conversation. Yes. And not moving very much most of the time, which is why that scene where he beats up the guy was stood out to me, because you saw this guy's a 70-year-old guy, and he can't move as he should be able to. But that concentration on dialogue, conversations, just those kind of personal interactions, is where the film shines, because that's where I thought there will be something really lost here with the de-aging, that the smoothing of wrinkles and things like that. You'll lose the essence of these performances, and I don't think it does.
No, I agree with that. And actually, it was very interesting how De Niro is also brilliant. And he is so De Niro, like you see in a way all his mannerisms and so on, right? Like, it is noticeably De Niro, and yet he brings kind of like this humor and these layers and this doubt, and kind of he's really very good at kind of like extracting like everything there is to extract from that part. I'm not sure about the moment where he betrays Hoffa though. I kind of.
That whole sequence, or is there a moment in it you're thinking of?
I'm thinking of, several moments actually, because it's all part of the same scene. So the moment where the Joe Pesci character asks him to do it, then the moment that he's in the car with Pacino, the moment where he actually commits it, which I think, and then the moment where he speaks to the Hoffa's wife. I think all of those moments, I would have liked more of a sense of guilt or, pain or doubt or, because they're from the point of view of the narrative, it's a moment of betrayal. Here's somebody who's done so much for him, who he owes so much to, and he's been asked to kill him. Right, so
I would have liked more guilt beforehand. I think it's notable that when they go into breakfast the next day after he's been asked to do it, and they're going to do it that day, he's and Pesci says, "How'd you sleep?" And he said, "I slept like a baby" or whatever. I thought, well, that line's got to mean something, right? Like, what? How can he sleep that well? Is he lying? I don't know. And then from then I believed that he was getting on with it and trying not to think about it. Really, he had to do this.
Well,
and then that phone call I thought was fantastic. I think you do hear in his voice, with the stammering and the stuttering and not really being able to say anything, guilt and unsureness. And then by the time at the end when he's talking to the priest and he says, "Who makes a phone call like that?" He's clearly talking about that phone call.
Yeah.
And the priest obviously doesn't know what he's doing, but that's when he's been living with this for probably 20 years at this point.
No, you're right about that phone call. Actually, I take that back. I mean, you do, and actually, that kind of slight stuttering and so on, that was brilliant. So I suppose I still mean from the moment that Joe Pesci forces him to do it. Yeah. I would have liked to see more contradiction, yearning, more of a struggle of his conscience or something. Though that he can't, that he has to do it, right? So but just to kind of indicate that gap between the having to do it and the feeling about having to do it, because Joe Pesci is always saying, I understand. Yeah, so I think it would have had a slightly different resonance if you would have seen that more clearly from him. But I think you do get it.
But just not as much as you would have liked.
Yes.
I agree with that.
So, I also thought that this is a film that is made for cinema, right? And it's going to be a tremendous loss to see it on television because... there are scenes, there are all kinds of scenes in the courtroom, outside the union shops, where at the Copacabana, where there are literally like hundreds and hundreds of extra, right? So there is kind of like this staging and these compositions, in which there's a lot, the funeral sequence, there's maybe like 50, 60 people in a frame, and sometimes more than that, right? So, you're staging protagonists in large groupings of people. And I think that will invariably also be a loss.
Yeah, there's some really beautiful blocking.
I love seeing Harvey Keitel. The moment that Harvey Keitel appeared, you think, this is almost like elegiac for all of Martin Scorsese's oeuvre. Because when I think of his work, really the faces that come to mind are Harvey Keitel's and Robert De Niro's and Joe Pesci's, right? And then, there's also a kind of brilliant casting, whoever did it. Because again, you see those faces that you associate, well, actually also with Coppola and the Godfather films, but very much with Scorsese, which are like these squat Italian faces, kind of, faces of ordinary people, but almost kind of cartoonily so. So the film kind of evokes, a kind of a career and, not just, the narrative. And that moment where Harvey Keitel comes in was the moment that kind of crystallized that for me. Yeah.
And that's kind of what I thought about the overall narrative, which I know you just said to ignore, but like that is kind of what it is. Like I'm not as familiar with Scorsese's films as I could be. I've seen a few of them, but I haven't seen his whole lot of or gangster films either. But like I said, these are people who you don't tend to see as very, very old men. These are people whose stories end in their 40s or 50s, and usually they die at some point. And you know, and the idea of the character looking back is tied up with the film, Jan Scorsese.
Yeah.
Looking back at his signature genre.
Yeah. And actually one of the things, I would love to study this film and not just see it, because, you know, I became conscious that, you know, the mise en scène is so dense, right? Like, you know, and purposeful and so on. So, you know, there were moments, sometimes scenes take place in front of a movie theater, right? And you're conscious that, you know, he's paying kind of homage to the period as well as kind of commenting on what's going on. So I noticed the Three Faces of Eve in the late 50s, right? I think that the moment where they meet Hoffa. And then there was Party Girl, the Nicholas Ray film. And then The Shootist, which is actually, you know, that film where John Wayne dies. I think it might be his last film with, you know, Ron Bacall and James Stewart.
Right.
Right. Yeah, so kind of, you know, and those are just like little moments that I caught because I was so embroiled in the narrative and the acting that you're not kind of quite paying attention to, all the things that are meant to be unconscious kind of in the background. But I'd love to pay more attention to that as well, actually.
Well, are you saying, I don't know the films, so are you saying that these films have a commonality in they are somehow to do with the end of things?
No, not in that sense. But, you know, Three Faces of Eve is about a woman who has three personalities.
Right.
Right, and it's kind of, personality disorder, right? Yeah, she's different things to different people. Party Girl is a Nicholas Ray film, you know, also about gangsters, right? So, you know, so, yeah, there's kind of, I think there is some, you know, the films are not chosen by accident,
Yeah.
So I kind of, I'd like to just analyze that a bit more closely. You were saying initially that the films are about structures of power and kind of and hierarchies and people kind of, you know, wanting to hold on to them. But is that true just of Jimmy Hoffa, or do you see that to be true? Yeah,
I think it's true. It really struck me that it was true of Russ, the character that Joe Pesci plays. I think throughout, he's never one of the big dogs, but he's always someone that is respected by the, you know, kind of people around him, and he's someone who knows how to hang on to that position, and, you know, he's ready to drop someone, for instance, if they become, you know, sort of toxic or difficult or whatever. Like so at the end, you know, he says, "I didn't want this to happen to Jimmy Hoffa," but obviously he didn't have the relationship with him that De Niro's character does. So he's kind of apologetic, but he does say, "I chose him over us. Yes. Fuck him." You know, and that is kind of him throughout. Like he survives. He survives, and not against the odds, right? It's not like he's constantly having to look out for himself. He just knows where to place himself.
Yeah, he's smart.
Exactly.
Right.
And wily, like you said.
And wily, but also humble, right? Because the contrast between him and Hoffa is that Hoffa's really full of himself, right? Like, I mean, the whole thing about, you know, people being on time and keeping him waiting, and yeah, it is about being top dog all the time, right?
Yeah.
You know, whereas, you know, Joe Pesci operates kind of in the background, like you said. Yeah, he's pulling strings. He knows who's who. He knows what's what, right? But he doesn't also, you know, put his face over the parapet. Yeah, he's not. Yeah. He's always kind of. He's happy to be background. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose it didn't occur to me about there being a thematic relationship between unions and the mob. Obviously, they are directly related. You know, Hoffa is in. He's involved with gangsters, even if he doesn't exactly qualify as one himself.
Built with the Teamsters pension fund, right?
You know, so they're clearly completely intertwined. But as far as sort of members of unions go, you only see him, and you see the kind of the leader of the competing union, played by Stephen Graham, the Jew that they keep referring to, the little guy. But you know, you don't see the structures of the unions as you do the structures of the mob.
Well, that's true. Not to the same degree, but you do see it, actually. And you do see all the interrelationships, right, of husbands and wives having jobs, you know, through the union and in the union, getting, you know, kind of salaries. And actually, I would go further. The film is about the intertwining of politics, the mob, the unions, and show business. Yeah, kind of,
And show business.
And show business, yes.
Go on.
Well, there's a lot kind of said about Vegas, and a lot of the scenes take place kind of, at the Copacabana. There's comedians, which I think is...
Don Rickles.
Don Rickles.
Played by Jim Norton.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and I think the person that unites them in a way is Joe Kennedy, who is both the father of a president who ran RKO Studios and who was a gangster, right? All combined, right? So I think kind of, the film is a commentary on that, actually.
It's certainly intertwined. You do notice every now and again when there's some get-together, there's the mayor there, or, he's in someone's pocket constantly, and there is a mention of that, at the very least.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a kind of holistic view of the way that those structures intertwine and maintain power and trade power.
It's such a smart film. It's just super intelligent, and you also see almost kind of different perspectives on a situation, as it's unfolding. Again, I gave the example, of the narrator, kind of the film's invisible narrator, but just by posting, kind of letters, right, kind of, it gives an entire different dimension to what you've just seen happening. Right?
Posting letters?
The subtitles, so-and-so got shot, right,
Yeah.
So-and-so died of cancer, so-and-so was killed in his church or whatever. Different ways in which people died, all around the same time. I don't know if you noticed, they were all like
late 70s,
early 80s, right?
Yeah. Well, I should clarify for anyone who hasn't seen it or isn't going to see it, it's that when some characters, you see them on screen, and typically minor characters, they don't do it with any major ones, I don't think. There'll be a freeze frame, and it'll say, Joe Schmo was shot in the chest 5 times outside his flat, August 17th, 1982.
But let's talk about those minor characters, because I think the brilliance of Scorsese is that he brings up these threads, and they are minor characters, and yet he shows you these minor characters in a way that evokes their whole life, their whole way of life. They're there with girlfriends, they've got attitudes, they've done something and are about to do something else. Yeah, you get kind of like this textured view of these characters at this moment. They don't just appear and die or something, right? Like, kind of, you see what they've done, you've seen who they are, you've seen why they're going to die, you've seen how they've betrayed, or, kind of are too full of themselves, or are just kind of too volatile, right? And then you see them on their own, you see them in the protagonist, you see them in the nightclub, you see them with their family. Yeah. So, I mean, I think that's amazing. And because there are so many of these minor characters, so several that stood out for me was, what was he? Show Off Joe, the guy who was killed in the restaurant.
I can't remember, but I remember the scene, but I don't remember his name.
Okay. So that was one of them. The whole thing about the lawyer played by Ray Romano, who is also brilliant. Yeah. Actually, he just appears throughout the film, actually almost on the sidelines or in the background. Yeah. He gets lines only when he's interacting about legal matters with the protagonist, right? But you get a sense of the whole life of this character as it appears throughout the film.
Yeah, and one of the framing structures is that drive to his wedding on the way they kill Jimmy Hoffa.
That's right.
Not his wedding, rather his daughter's wedding.
Yeah. So, you get a sense of De Niro's relationship with his daughters, Pacino's relationship with his sons. Like, it's actually tremendous, I think, what he does. Like, how he weaves in all of these different characters, but whilst evoking their own life in the narrative, and how then that intersects with the main narrative that is the one that you're following the through line for.
Yeah, like even the minor characters aren't plot functions.
Yes.
They are people.
Exactly.
And it's a network, it's a web of people in a place, and they interact. That is wonderful, and it's really rich.
Oh. The other thing that I loved was the music, which is very characteristic Martin Scorsese music. Yeah, it's the pop hits of I would say, I don't know, from late 50s to early 70s, that dominate. And actually particularly that period of American pop, with the girl bands and, really kind of before rock and roll, I don't know if you noticed.
Well, I suppose in the choices.
Yeah.
Like rock and roll was a thing by this point, clearly.
No, it was. But what he's choosing are, early 1960s pop songs, in the main.
Yeah.
Or that style of music anyway. So I thought that was very interesting. I now can't remember any of the titles, but actually, if we take a moment, if we can find that.
Well, one thing I was going to say, though, in response is that actually, it didn't occur to me that this was a sort of jukebox thing going on. Because actually what occurred to me was the score, because there's a score as well as kind of pop music. And also when the score drops out, there's kind of uncharacteristic, I would say, amount of silence. I think you really expect Scorsese to be backing every scene with pop. That's what you really think about. Maybe not so much in Silence, for instance, the 2016 film, but in the gangster films, that's kind of what you expect. And then, towards the end here, especially, there are these longueurs, these silences. I suppose the silence really occurred to me in the Jimmy Hoffa murder sequence. Like there's an awful lot of silence around there.
Yes.
There may have been a bit of a score at 1 or 2 points, but there is a lot of meditative silence, and I suppose that would have been, as we were saying about the character not feeling enough or not transparently feeling enough guilt that we would like to have seen. That would. There's an attempt to do that through the silence around him.
It's so interesting because the songs are you have Fats Domino, you have Glenn Miller, which is really 40s at the beginning, but then Percy Faith, Marty Robbins, Johnny Ray, they are really kind of that period, late 50s, early 60s, and it's really wonderful. And it ends, the music at the end, is more like salsa, isn't it? Yeah, kind of.
I don't remember.
Anyway, I love the.
You mean during the closing credits?
No, not during the. I think it's almost during the murder where it starts. Da da da. Yeah, like.
Oh right. I must say I don't remember. To be honest.
Anyway. Yeah, there you go.
I also want to think about the composition of certain scenes, because like we've talked about, I suppose the kind of overall structure to the overall themes, but there are individual scenes that just absolutely shine, and they are these set pieces, that I referred to, where these aren't necessarily set pieces of action; these are set pieces of conflict and dialogue. So particularly Al Pacino, and his various conflicts with the Stephen Graham character, where they have that argument about you were late and I want you to apologise to me for what you said when we were in prison and such. And these are scenes about jostling for power and position and I suppose sort of knowing or admitting or not admitting, kind of what your level of power is. So I think it's true of the Al Pacino character. Like he doesn't realise how out of the kind of he's become sort of persona non grata basically by the time he's out of prison, but he doesn't know, he seems to not even know that, let alone accept it. And that's what those conflicts with Stephen Graham are about, I think. And when he's sat there at the awards do for De Niro, he's on stage because he's been invited there because he's a close friend of De Niro and he's got invited to give him this award, but it's not his way back into the union. It's not his way back into power.
Well, and the irony is that he thinks he's above all of that anyway.
Yeah.
He thinks he's there to do De Niro this massive favor, and kind of maybe to chat to a few people and maybe get a little bit of business done. But, he sees himself in the position of the Don, the person who is like, kind of doing for others, not the person who's like, he's above all of that.
Yeah.
he thinks.
Yeah. Well, he certainly I think he does think of himself as needing to get back into it, though. Like, he knows obviously that he's not in charge, because he's not.
Well,
because I think when he gives that speech and he gets people chanting Hoffa, that is like, that's him turning it into a rally for votes, isn't it?
It is. But he's got this whole thing about the union belonging to him.
Yeah.
Right. So he's clearly doesn't have his job back, so he's not. But actually, he still thinks that he wields more power and all of that than anybody else. And in a certain sense, you get the sense that he does, because part of the plot point is he's blocking money. So he's not without power, right? But just not the amount of power that he had previously, and he's unaware of the extent. Yeah.
Yeah. To which he's not. He's no longer
a player.
Exactly. But I suppose I was getting off the point because I did want to think about those individual scenes that kind of led me off the path a bit. Like, I wanted to think about, I suppose, how beautifully self-contained they are, that these scenes have stakes and they have winners and losers, and that they are so funny. Yeah. Hugely funny. And this is character sort of comedy that comes out of conflict. So Al Pacino getting very pissed off with other people. It's constantly funny. Yeah.
I think De Niro being recessive, whilst also, he doesn't say much, he doesn't want to say much. He always wants to smooth the situation. Yeah, he says as little as possible, and when he says something, it is to create a bridge, in a very understated way. I mean, all of that is kind of tremendous, and it's funny.
It struck me, actually, because we were talking about in Maleficent 2, the male characters in that dinner scene wanting to kind of recede into the background and just wanting to avoid things, and I don't think that works at all. But it struck me that this is something that De Niro's character does here, and I think it's very successful because it's very interesting that he tries to be diplomatic, he tries to facilitate dialogue, and keep fight to a minimum, and that sort of thing.
I mean, my God, in the current debate on the Marvel films, and this one, which I think we need to address.
Okay.
I mean, I do think this film kind of is Scorsese's defense, because I think if you take something like the Avengers and you compare it to this, you just can't. And it's not just because it's a different kind of movie. It's because this film is about something. It's much funnier. It's much funnier about more serious things. It depicts a world better, right? It offers a critique, that is not, comparable. So,
Yeah. No,
I don't want to say anything more than that. I mean, I'm also not, I love the comic book films, actually. And to me, kind of, they are cinema. They are young people cinema. So, I think the argument that they're not cinema doesn't wash unless, you have another idea of what cinema is, right? Because obviously all of this kind of rests on the foundation of, well, what is cinema? And, cinema has always been park rides or whatever, right? Like, from the beginning of time, and cinema has always been commercial, and so I actually don't think, for me, that Scorsese's problems are with any of that, but it is kind of, to do with seriousness of intent and achievement of kind of complexity.
Did you read his editorial in, was it the New York Times?
I did read that.
Because I think he spoke a little bit in there about the idea of being commercial cinema, which is, as you say, like, films have always been commercial.
The cinema he loves is commercial cinema. The John Ford westerns.
Well, this is the thing I was thinking, like,
all of that, the Hitchcock. You
kind of think westerns were so dominant in the 1950s, for instance. Like, he would probably be making those same complaints then. Like, do you know what I mean? They are as dominant then as superhero films are now. I don't think it's a new thing.
No, exactly. So in that sense, we can disagree, with Scorsese, right? And he contradicts himself. There's no more commercial director than Hitchcock, and there's no more commercial director that is closest to, a theme park ride than Hitchcock. Yeah,
And Hitchcock's the one he brings up in that article specifically.
Yeah, that's right. So, but I also do think that he's got a valid argument when, none of the Marvel films can compare with Hitchcock's best. They just don't. So I think that, kind of there is a critique. I mean, there's now been, I don't know how many, 20, 30 of those films?
The Marvel films are up to about 23.
Yeah, okay. And kind of the only one that I would defend in any way is really Black Panther. The others are fun, but they're only fun, and I think kind of The Irishman is fun, but it's so much more than fun.
I suppose the central sort of, or the best point that I think Scorsese is making, whether explicitly or not, is the idea that these films are dominant to the point of excluding
everything
other
else.
things. He talks about the mid-range film, the mid-budget, mid-range film not really existing anymore. I think he talked about.
I think that's right.
And I think there's truth in that.
There is for sure.
So like, it's not so much that these films are so popular they shouldn't exist, but it's that they shouldn't be allowed to drive everything else out.
Well, two things. A, they shouldn't be allowed to drive everything else out, which they are doing. But also, I do think they lack ambition.
Yeah.
I do think, so I do think even within the studio system, the people that made the most popular films, they not only had an ambition like Hitchcock to create tension and suspense and kind of take you through this ride, but also to do other things and to do other things with great beauty, So, and I don't think that this thing about kind of critically commenting on the culture and so on or kind of being innovative with the form or experimental with the form or with narration, I don't think that's true in my view of the Marvel films, but the majority of the Marvel films. As I said, the only one I would kind of unconditionally defend is Black Panther.
Black Panther really stands out for that reason, though, doesn't it?
Yeah, and it's kind of, I mean, it's a lot of films that they've made, right?
Yeah.
Like, so it's and Maleficent, which we saw earlier today, is, an example of that. Yeah, it's a dumb movie.
Yeah, it's like if the Marvel films are products. Yes. Okay, Maleficent isn't Marvel; it's under Disney. But if the Marvel films are products, then Maleficent isn't even a good product.
Yeah, that's right. But it's in the same genre. Yeah, big budget world, really corporate, a sop of, themes of identity and belonging. But it's really a sop, really kind of, very badly worked through. So, I mean, I do think that this film in particular, and actually, I mean, his whole career as a filmmaker is a shining defense of a particular kind of cinema, which is not the only cinema.
But he's made a film for Netflix, which is not cinema. Less so than Marvel.
Well, this thing about what is cinema and what isn't is like so fraught. I kind of, I mean, I would not say that any of these things are not cinema. I mean, to me, they kind of clearly are.
Sure.
Right.
But it's not being shown in cinemas very widely.
But it is being shown in cinemas.
Some, but it's limited release even in the US.
I think the interesting thing, because I have an issue with, people who proudly proclaim that they never go out to the pictures, but kind of can't stop talking about movies, and I think Scorsese basically said, I don't know of a single filmmaker who does not prefer to have his films being seen on a big screen, and in a cinema. Kind of the benefits are obvious, the social dimension, and kind of the size of the screen, and kind of all of those things. If you think that cinema is an art, then actually size, luminosity, kind of all of those things matter. And actually, I also think that an audience matters.
But then what that brings me back to is he's made a film for Netflix.
But he's made a film for Netflix, that is kind of being screened theatrically, that could be screened theatrically in the future.
A little bit.
Well, I mean, that has more to do with the status of exhibition than, with the kind of film that he's doing. I actually think if he had made the film for Netflix in an artistic sense rather than, as a contract, he wouldn't have done it the way that he has. He wouldn't have had those big crowd scenes, because actually you don't see them very well on a small screen.
But I suppose I think that's thinking around the point though. Like the point is still that, I'm trying to think how to phrase it. Like, the thing about Netflix showing this theatrically is they're not showing it theatrically nearly as much as they could.
They're not showing it everywhere.
Even in the USA, it's getting a limited release.
Sure.
And this is a film that, under a conventional cinematic distributor, would have a big, wide release. And it could be a flop. I mean, it cost $160 million. It could be a huge flop. Maybe people wouldn't see a 3.5 hour film.
But listen.
On the other hand, it could be that Netflix are throwing away a lot of money by not releasing it as widely as they could.
Possibly.
Which means that they're making a point.
Well, possibly. But I think my original distinction kind of stands. There's a difference between how you get your film financed, right? And, whether the filmmakers are making it with a big screen, with a theatrical release and a big screen in mind or not. And actually you see the evidence in your screens all the time.
No, I agree with that, like the aesthetic. But he didn't have to agree to make this film for Netflix when they stepped in.
How do we know? It might not have been made otherwise.
No, so he didn't have to agree to make it with Netflix.
But then that's to say that they wouldn't be made. I don't understand your point at all.
Well, my point...
If you make it, it can be shown in cinemas, and it can be shown in cinemas in all kinds of contexts. I mean, maybe in 5 years there'll be a retrospective and it might just take place in one city, but you'll be able to show this work. The work exists, and it can be shown in a whole variety of ways. It would be stupid to say, I prefer not to make it than to make it, with Netflix money. I mean, filmmakers make movies with gangster money and dictators' money. What, you're not going to accept Netflix to make your movie?
No, gangster and dictator's money doesn't... Yeah, but the gangster and dictator money doesn't tend to come with the proviso that this is going to be streamed online and shown in cinemas as little as possible. That's the point I'm making. That's why this question about what is cinema and how important the cinema is interesting in the context of this specific film, because this was made with Netflix money. And I agree, if you turn down the Netflix money and no one else comes in, then the movie doesn't get made, and that's a shame. But who's to say there aren't other projects on the table, there aren't other people he could go and work with on different things?
Well,
but this specific thing, it was made for Netflix, and he knew that.
Okay, but it doesn't matter. It's gotten a theatrical release. We saw it on a big screen in a theatre, and we saw it in Birmingham. Okay, so, it's not the same as if it would have been shown in 3,000 theatres, but it's had a theatrical release. And we saw it, and we benefited from seeing it.
We did. And isn't it a shame that so many people won't? I suppose one other thing that we could talk about, which is not Netflix related, but it is related to the Scorsese Marvel thing, is I remember probably 15 years ago when Roger Ebert wrote about video games. He wrote that people had tried to get him to play video games for a long time and he would never do it and stuff. And he said video games aren't art. And this ignited a debate, because this was even before gamers got really, really toxic. It's like, how dare you say they're not art? And they said, look at this game. And one of the things that he said in his defence, when he did a kind of editorial as well, was most films aren't art. Which I thought was an interesting perspective. Like, if all video games aren't art, but then actually very few films are as well. It's a high bar to reach.
It is. Though, I thought John Waters in his talk last night was so interesting, because he said something like, I hate these people who say they just go to movies to be like entertained or to feel good, he said.
Yes.
It's like, he was saying, I already feel good,
Yeah.
Kind of what I want to go to movies for is to be disturbed, to be shocked, to be made to think in ways that I don't normally think, about kind of subjects that I don't normally have access to. And those are the kinds of movies that I like. And he mentioned specifically, Gaspar Noé and Climax and so on, which I thought was very interesting.
Yeah, he's talked about Irreversible before when he was in this Big Think interview that I've mentioned to you a few times. He was asked, what are the most offensive films you've seen? And he thought up Irreversible. Yeah. He said he'd put that like at number one.
Well, that's
so he
true.
clearly loves Noé.
But let's end it here, actually, because I want to...
go to bed.
No, I was thinking, I want to have something, but then I was also thinking if, is there something else we can catch
Oh no, I need to get home.
You need to go home.
I do need to get home.
All right.
So let's wrap up. I mean, I suppose I would have liked to talk about the film even more because it is a really wonderful film, and I suppose for a lot of it, as I say, I was thinking, where is this going to go? And it's not to say that there are things that could have easily been cut. I mean, if you wanted to cut like half an hour or an hour out of this, I would not want to be the guy to do it.
Yeah.
It fills up its time with a lot of story.
I mean, to me, it just went by very quickly. It flowed beautifully. I actually didn't have your problem of where is this going. I just went with it, really.
Sure.
And I was entertained throughout.
But I would say that final 30, 40 minutes where things come to a very gradual close and there is all this feeling of loss and reflection. I think the film transforms at that point into something else, and it's a really, really surprisingly moving coda to the whole thing.
Well,
I was moved.
Yes, I was as well, and it's a wonderful reply to the beginning, because actually I don't know if you remember the beginning, but I thought, oh shit, this is like my least favorite type of shot in cinema, where the camera snakes through in this kind of long shot and you go through all these corridors and, and then it rests on a side angle on De Niro
in that wheelchair,
so I thought the end kind of was like a beautiful reply to the beginning. This is how you got here, and this is what you've become.
Yeah, that opening shot did make me laugh because I thought this is such a Goodfellas shot, and I felt it felt deliberate.
I did feel that as well. Though I also think when Goodfellas did it, it was kind of a different type of thrill than now, where you could just kind of carry a camera with you for 3 hours, or more.
Yeah.
So anyway,
but it did feel like a homage to himself.
Well, it may be. I mean, certainly, I thought of it with the Copacabana bit. There's also a Copacabana scene in Goodfellas. So, it might be kind of self-referential in those ways that I haven't quite picked up on a first viewing. But this is definitely a film that I'll see again when it does come out in Netflix. So, if you get a chance to see it while it's still playing in the cinemas, it's very much worth it.
Yeah, and if you don't get a chance to see it while it's playing in the cinemas, see it on Netflix.
Though it'll
better
be
than nothing.
A very different kind of experience. Yeah.
Jolly good.
All right, so thank you very much for listening. We are eavesdropping at the movies, and we are on
iTunes, SoundCloud, YouTube, and Spotify. The social media is Facebook and Twitter, and the website is eavesdroppingatthemovies.com.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.